Hello, everyone. Kelly here once again, and I have Rebecca today, who is the owner of Rebecca Ruddle Voice Studio. I am so excited for this. Rebecca and I are going to be talking about how she left her other teaching job and this fall has added over $7,500 a month in revenue total into her studio, which is just like absurd. It's so exciting, and I'm so happy for you, and I'm so excited to talk about this more today. Before I get off on tangents, because I absolutely will, and dive into a lot of detail, tell us a little bit more about your studio. Who do you work with? What services do you provide? All that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I teach private voice and piano lessons, and I currently go in home to each
Mhm.
student's home. And all of my students are children under the age of 14 and under right now in my studio.
Awesome. Awesome. And in the travel lessons too, this is something I think in your area that's been in really high demand for a while. How did you decide to start offering travel lessons versus students coming to you or finding a studio space?
I think, well, I have a friend who's doing something similar, and
Mm.
she also had the same trajectory of leaving a studio job and then offering in home lessons. Um, Also, when I've had my first consultations, a lot of the parents were like, I have many other kids. I actually
Mm.
cannot get them somewhere else. And they're struggling to get all their children to all the different activities. So it seemed like something that was very in demand. And in the Facebook marketing too, a lot of people were like, wait, you do in home? Like that was the first question. So I think that sort of led it. And I knew someone who was doing it as well. Yeah.
Well, it's helpful when we're going by demand. I mean, obviously there was so much demand for it that it felt like a natural progression. It seems like it's also helped to grow your studio a lot because it's so convenient for the families that you're working with. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great match, and it's something that I it sounds like you really enjoyed too, getting to be in your students' environment and making sure they have like good working instruments and a good setup for practice and everything certainly is a benefit for them too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I can see now for the piano students, I can be like,
Mm.
oh, I would recommend maybe like let's think about another keyboard. I know they just
Yeah.
started, so we can always wait to make sure that this is something that they're actually interested in continuing. But things that I wouldn't normally be able to see that like, oh, this keyboard you don't have dynamics, or if you hold it out for longer than a half note, it stops playing. Those sorts of things that you can
Uh-huh.
just hear. And also, I think I've seen too, particularly with singing, making
Mm.
sure like they're singing in their home and working through them with like, oh, people can hear me, you know? And I
Yeah.
think that's really
That's so
big
true.
because to practice at home, particularly when you're singing, I feel like sometimes it can be a little more vulnerable at first.
Mm.
And with piano too, I guess. But I think already being there with me and like, oh, we've already ripped the band-aid off, so to speak. Mom and dad have already heard me from downstairs or where upstairs, wherever we are. So I found that that's also really helpful.
That's really interesting. I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way. That I mean, obviously when we're practicing at home, yes, everyone can hear us. If it's a keyboard, you can like plug in the headphones and it's more hidden still and
Yeah.
you're practicing in secret. But it is a scarier jump. And also if parents have opinions on student progress, then
Yeah.
it feels a little bit more vulnerable sometimes to be doing that where everyone can hear. That makes complete sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, obviously, we're talking about the studio as it stands right now. So I want to jump back to the beginning. And you and I had met in May and started working together kind of end of May, early June. At that point in your career and in your studio growth, what did things look like, obviously, in your full career, but also in the private studio at that point?
So the private studio, speaking both the private studio and the
Sure.
multi-teacher.
Yeah.
So the private studio, I had at that point five private students.
Okay.
So around 3 hours of teaching. And I just fit that in the days that I was not working at the studio. And then the studio, I was working Monday, Tuesday, Thursday from like 3 to 9. At that point, it was toward the summer, so maybe not a full caseload, but I was pretty booked 3 to 9, 2:30 to 9, mostly half-hour lessons, just like back to back to back.
Got it. And when we first met, it was with this idea that leaving the studio was the big goal. Why was that your goal? Why are you considering like taking the leap into self-employment? Because it's a big decision to make. What were you thinking about at that point in time?
At that point, I mean, I guess it's just very practical. Financial
Mm,
financials, because that particular studio was taking about 70% of the lesson pay. So I was working a lot and I had a lot of students, but it was really hard just to make ends meet. And also
yeah.
I wanted to run my own studio and have more relationships with the parents and the students.
Mm,
There was a little bit of this, like, for good reason, we don't have parent contact, so sometimes I wouldn't even see them because they're just picking them up outside. But that was really important to me, and being able to run a studio the way that I want to was really important as well.
now obviously you see parents all the time. You're in their homes and you're
Yeah,
around the family, which is it's such
literally.
an it's such an amazing part of what we do is that like in-depth relationship that we build with students. We work with them for years, one-on-one for half an hour to an hour at a time every week. And I mean, it's a whole other uh, little diatribe that I could go down, but it's so cool to build those relationships and have that intensive connection with a student and with their family. It is
Yeah.
weird teaching in a studio environment like that where the lesson ends and they just leave and
Yeah.
that's
Some
it. There
people's
is no
parents
further
I had
connection.
never met because they were being dropped off by a nanny, or
Yeah.
mom and dad could never come in, and
Oh,
it
that's
really was
wild.
just like I have to get to the next lesson. And yeah, so
Yeah.
it I feel better about it now. It's more of a
Mm,
relationship rather than a transaction.
yeah. That makes total sense. And you were working a lot. I mean, at that point, between the three to 3.5 hours a week of the private studio, I think it was also like 17 hours a week at the studio. So you were full. Like the calendar was booked. It was kind of
Yeah.
wild.
I was booked, and I had a waiting list at the studio, and like if a
Mm.
student left, it was promptly filled. Um yeah, I had a lot of students.
Was it a little scary to be thinking about that transition of like, yes, financially, I know I could make possibly up to 70% more if I was working independently, but also that means I have to do it independently and they aren't building that wait list and marketing for me.
It was very scary. And to be honest, I feel like when we first had our meeting, I still wasn't even sure if it was possible to do it anytime soon. And you were
Mm.
so confident. You were like, oh, yeah, we can do this. And I was like, really? I don't know.
I was
like, I
confident enough
don't,
for the both of us.
yeah, I
I
don't
don't know if
know
that's
if
a good
I,
thing or a bad thing.
no, it's a great thing because I honestly don't know if I could have made the leap when I
Mm.
did, as soon as I did, as cold turkey, so to speak, as I did. I just, all right, I'm done. I think if I was by myself, I mean, we can get into all this later too. If I was by myself, I don't think I would have seen as much growth
Mm.
as quickly as I did, just because of the tools and knowledge and everything that you gave me. But I also don't think I would have been able to do it as quickly. I probably would have dropped off a day and tried to
Mm.
fill, but I still wasn't even full on the 2 days that I had off from the studio. I was like mostly full on Fridays, but on Wednesdays I just had one student at that
Mm.
point. So there was still like room to fill. So it was a really scary leap that I don't think that I could have done without you.
Mm.
So
I mean, things are going really, really well now, and obviously we're kind of hinting at this a little bit that the studio is has grown exponentially in the last 2 to 3 months in particular. So we kind of spent the summer, and I want to talk about that process a little bit too. So the summer was spent a lot on like getting things organized. Like we needed a website, we needed studio policies for your own independent studio. Tell me a little bit more about that process and what you were doing in those first couple months to kind of lay the groundwork.
Yeah. So I had gotten a bare bones website together, and I had studio policies, but I was able to, with all of your materials, like hone those. And
Mm.
Isaac also gave some good feedback on that as well, on the website end. And yeah, I I was looking at my policies and honing those, and we completely changed the structure because it was just pay for as many lessons as you get in
Mm.
a month, um, and just pay per lesson before the month. And we switched it to a flat rate tuition. Um, yeah, so there was just a lot of preparation, and I don't think I'm doing this justice for all the preparation that is back end.
It's all good. And refining these things too, because you had some of these things established and we were doing this refinement with this goal in mind that it was long-term stable success. So, okay, you're talking about the transition to flat rate policy, for example.
Mhm.
And so recording this, it's the middle of November. Next week is Thanksgiving. Next month we have the holidays. Obviously we've got a big winter break and we've got a lot of chaos in the schedule as a result of all those holidays and breaks from school. Do you feel like that transition? I feel like this is a loaded question. You obviously know where I'm going with this, but when
Yeah.
we're talking about that flat rate tuition, looking at November and December, do you feel like that's made an impact in your studio and your revenue and stability and running your own business?
It has made an impact. I think I'm someone who is a big saver. So
Mm.
for me, it's nice to know, like, oh, I'm going to make this amount every month. For me, I don't think that was the biggest change, just because my mom's an accountant. So I'm like a crazy saver. But it is nice to know. I think for me, it's lovely to have everyone on auto pay, because
Mm.
on the first day of the month, everything runs. I don't have to like chase people down for money. I think last month it was like one person's card had their billing address entered incorrectly. And all I had to do was say, hey, could you update this? This is how you log in and do it. They did it. I ran it again and it was done. And then it was like, whereas before, even just with 5 clients, I felt like I was chasing after them. And then it just is an icky feeling, like
Yeah.
talking to them mostly about money. So that was a big change for me. Yeah.
Do you feel like it's improved the relationships with the families that you're working with as a result of that change, where we're kind of separating the music and the money a little bit more?
I think so. I think it's also convenient for families, because they have a lot going on. It's not like they're just trying not to pay me and I'm chasing after them.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's also just they have lots going on. They have other kids, or that there are so many other activities that they have to think about, that this is just one less thing. So that was really huge for me. And also just being able to project and be like, oh, like I'm gonna make this amount. It's a certain peace of mind too.
Hmm. That makes total sense. That makes total sense. Okay, so we get all the back end stuff ready. We're feeling more confident in July. And I think it was like end of July, early August. We came to a session and you said, I think I'm going to leave the studio. And at the time, we had some growth and it was starting to take off a little bit, but we didn't have the growth that we've had the last couple months.
Yeah.
We've talked about the confidence, but what prompted that and what gave you the confidence when you were looking at that timing to make such a clean decision? Not like I'm going to stop one day at the studio, which was the original plan, was to kind of phase things out. We took a big leap. How did that come to pass?
Ooh. I mean, I think you were a huge calming voice in my mind. So that was very helpful. I think also your advice, I had lots of consultations and people couldn't fit in on Wednesday or Friday, but your advice to me
Mm.
was start like a wait list, like, hey, I'm going to have this available in 3 to 4 weeks. And then you can just like choose your time because it's an open day. So then
Yeah.
I think that was able to show like, oh, there is some interest that I could fill at least Tuesdays. And then it started like Thursdays. Um, So I think that was really helpful. But I have to be honest, it was still like such a big leap. And I I
Uh-huh.
I know I came onto Q&A calls and I was like, I don't even know. Like this is so scary. But it was very calming because you were just such a consistent, just calming, soothing person. Just like it's really okay. Like everything's gonna be fine. Um, and at the time too, I think the marketing that we were doing online in Facebook groups was starting to pick up, and then just there were lots of leads coming in. So I
Yeah.
think it was like we have it set in place. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
It was
But it
more of
was
a
still really
database
scary.
decision at that point. Like it's not, and this is something that we obviously talk about a lot in the program, that sometimes things feel a certain way. Like it's always going to feel scary. I mean, to make a big leap like this, it's always
Yeah.
going to feel terrifying. But sometimes the numbers and our emotions don't quite match up. So to have those numbers, I mean, I remember a live Q&A call where you're like, yeah, well, I've got like, I think at that time it was like 3 or 4 people, like 3 or 4 families lined up on Tuesdays,
Mhm.
and the revenue would be X, and this is what I make on a Tuesday at the studio.
Yeah.
It's already more. And these are people that have said like, yes, I'm ready and I would love to start as soon as you have the time available. So it's not quite guaranteed. Like we don't have that on auto pay quite yet,
Right.
but it's more of a sure thing than like I just have this wait list with nobody scheduled and I have no idea where they could fit if they're even still interested. They have said like, yes, let's do it. And that data and that plan and that communication in place just makes it feel more structured and organized. And then even with all the fears, you're still looking at the numbers thinking like, no, this does make the logical sense that I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. Completely. Completely.
So when we made that decision, again, like I think this was end of July to leave at the end of August,
Mhm.
and we talked about how scary it was. What else were you feeling?
I think also I was really, I'll probably get emotional thinking about it, which is so silly because it's like over, but I also was really worried about like letting students down. Like I had
Mm,
them for so long, and built these relationships with
yeah.
these students and seen them go through recitals and have ups and downs and all these things. I was really afraid that like people would be angry at me or like upset, or I mean, selfishly, like I just love all my students. So I was like, what if they
Yeah.
just don't even care? I don't know. There were just so many emotions wrapped up in having to tell all these people. But you were so helpful in that too, because I think had I done it myself, I would have just let the studio deal with that transition and how to tell the students at the studio themselves. Um, but you put a plan in place that how are we going to tell students who have been on vacation all summer that I will never see again and to this day
Yeah.
have never seen, which was also very emotional. I don't think I would have thought like let me send out a personal message to them or like how do I want the studio to tell students when you know I felt very in control and I had a plan set in place for when I told my boss. Like, of course, he had ideas too, and we like found
Hmm.
something together. But I think I wouldn't have had that in place without you. So that also felt very calming, even though it was super emotional. I had a
Mm.
plan and was like, let's follow the plan. Um, yeah,
And that transition to, I think, one of the big goals that we had talked about repetitively too is we don't want to break rapport with the studio. Like
yeah,
we like the students that we have at the studio. We also just like the faculty and the people that own the building and own the company, and we want to do right by them also and give them time to help support our students and
yeah,
replace you, which is again like a lot of mixed feelings when we're talking about that. But having structure in place to support them in that so that our students aren't just left in the dust is so key.
yeah,
It's a
exactly.
tough
And giving
transition
them
to make,
enough
but obviously
time.
with good reasons. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. It's not a surprise. It's not like I'm done in 2 weeks, but we had made the decision and we gave them about a month's notice to work through that and helped them with
yeah,
that transition, which maintaining rapport in the community and goodwill is I think, really important. And I don't think we can
Yeah.
overstate the importance of that. Like, if we want to make a transition, let's do it in a way that is mutually beneficial because it's for the benefit of our students and for the music community as a whole in our local area.
Yeah.
And that has to supersede everything else.
Yeah. And that was another thing too. Like I left right before the beginning of the school year.
Hmm.
Yes, that's correct. So I also didn't want it to be at a time like I wanted my students to feel, a lot of people were just coming back from vacation or like summer activities. I didn't want them to feel like whiplash. So it was
Hmm.
finding that right time with you and like, yeah, like you said, for the good for the studio and to make sure that my students could be set up with someone else at the studio and feel good going into the new school year.
Absolutely. Okay, I know we've hinted at the marketing a little bit. Let's talk about that. So what has been working for you? I mean, obviously we've gone from 5 students in June to now you have 30 students in your private studio, and the revenue, as we said at the beginning of this video, has grown in total on a monthly basis in new revenue over $6,000 per
Yeah.
month, which is so exciting and impressive. And you've worked really hard for this, and I'm so proud of you. What has been kind of the meat and potatoes of that marketing work that's doing well for you and successful on an ongoing basis?
The biggest marketing that's worked is Facebook parent groups for me. Yeah. I got a few like once I started signing on new students, a few parents referring out. Um, but it was mostly Facebook marketing groups.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Facebook groups, I mean, they can feel a little hit or miss sometimes. And I'm sure people that are listening to this, maybe they've tried this in the past. Had you tried posting in some local groups before we started working together?
I had and I have to say I never would have interacted as much in the group just
Hmm.
as a community member. Like, oh, does anyone know where I can get like good bagels? Or, I never would have interacted as much in that way. And I I never persistently posted.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I don't want to bother people.
Yep.
Clearly no one's interested. So I'll just stop. But there was such a very detailed plan of like, I'm going to do this on this day and do that on that day and just keep picking away, picking away. And I would have never done that myself. I would have felt like nobody wants to hear
Not going to
this, so
repeat it.
I'll
Yeah.
just stop. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
one post didn't
So,
work. I'm not going to try it again. Well, and
yeah,
what you're
exactly.
posting, the actual content of the post has certainly changed too. And obviously it's attracting the students that you want to be working with. When people reach out to you, do they say like I was most excited about XYZ that you said in your post? Like do they call out specific examples of why they're contacting you over the other teachers that are doing the exact same thing in that group?
Yeah. I think sometimes people see the in home and that speaks to them, but
Mhm.
mostly the the students that have signed up with me and that we have a really good consultation with, they're like, oh, I just really want them to have fun and enjoy
Hmm.
the process of lessons. And there are many reasons for that. It's either the parent had a bad music experience growing up where they were like,
Yeah.
I hated my lessons and I want them to have a lot of fun. And sometimes they're coming from another teacher who was just not jiving with them,
Hmm.
or they're having issues with maybe they're not feeling confident and they really want to build that. So I think we worked together to find that student centered copy that was like, what are they going to find with me? Things that I love working on and how I approach a lesson so they could see what a lesson would be like with me in just a couple sentences. And then, of course,
Hmm.
I elaborate on that in the consultation. But I
Sure,
think
sure, yeah. Give a
that
lot
was
more detail.
very, yeah. But I think that was really crucial. It's not just like, oh, I teach voice and piano lessons in this area. And I think also I used to be like, I'm a graduate of XYZ and I'm doing this,
Hmm.
like trying to prove my worth. Like, this is why I should be teaching your kid. when it's, and I don't even teach lessons that way. I teach in a very student-led, student-centered, like, this is your time, like, let's figure this out together. So I think just coming back to the roots of like why I teach and how I teach and
Mm.
showing that rather than trying to prove why I should be teaching them was very important.
It's something you hear a lot in marketing, especially when people talk about social media. And I'm sure we all get the content creators on Instagram and TikTok and things that talk about like being genuine and like showing up for your audience. And this is my interpretation of that. Like what people really want to hear is how how we work together. What do we have in common? How are we aligned as opposed to like the sales pitch? And I
Yeah.
get uncomfortable reading that copy sometimes. And it's tiny refinements. Like this is not a massive, massive shift, but those tiny little edits that we can make all the difference. I mean, obviously now we've got all these students coming and they're thrilled. And also the students that you want to work with are finding you as opposed to just any student. It's people who
Yeah.
value the fun and the lessons, and they value that more student-led education and curriculum building and more individualized planning as opposed to a more kind of strict approach, which there's a teacher for that too. And when students are excited, they're
Completely.
going to find that
Yeah.
fit.
Yeah, and to that point, I was really surprised in consultations. I was like, oh, ideal student. You know, like it wasn't weeding through this sea of
Yeah.
people that I'm like, oh, you know, I don't really do strict classical advanced piano. You know, like it
Yeah.
was, I felt like they were already in front of me. And there were a few like obviously examples
Outliers.
of people
Yeah.
maybe we didn't quite match up for whatever reason, but for the most part I was like, oh my gosh, another ideal student. Like I was just so excited.
Oh,
It was lovely. Yeah.
it's awesome. And it saves so much time. And now we're not talking to people that we don't want to work with on an ongoing basis. It's more the percentage of ideal students finding you is higher. And it saves you a lot of energy and stress because of that too. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And also, just to sort of circle back, I am not a very salesy person in general. Like to me that
Mm,
feels very icky. And I
yeah.
think I had joined so many Facebook groups, you know, in my area and had maybe posted like once or maybe twice. But
Which was probably
even that,
really uncomfortable to do at the beginning too.
yeah. And it just felt like it was just an icky feeling, but
Yeah.
the way that we were posting was like very student centered and like I had this whole schedule for everything. So it just felt like, okay, this is what I do on Tuesday mornings and Wednesday mornings. And, you know, it just felt much more authentic to myself and how
Mm,
I operate as a human, let alone a teacher. And so it was much easier for me to do and felt genuine. Yeah.
yeah. Sometimes marketing feels like when you're trying to be salesy and when you're trying to market, what I've heard from you and other teachers in a similar position is it feels disingenuous and it also feels a little dishonest. Like
Yeah.
I don't go around spouting where I got my degree in music from. That's not what I talk about 24/7. So if I go into a
Yeah.
Facebook post or a Facebook group and I make a post that that's what it's focused on, obviously I'm not lying about it. I'm telling the truth of where I got my degree, but it feels dishonest because that's not what I really care about. And that's
Yeah.
not what I really want to display. And it doesn't feel authentic. And when
Yeah.
we write posts that feels like it's actually my voice, it's the things that I want to say, it's the way that I want to say it, that it feels more comfortable and real. And obviously you're getting better results as a result
Yeah.
of that, which is awesome too.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Completely.
Now the studio's grown a lot and our revenue is amazing. And I mean, we've got this just thriving business right now with a wait list. Like the studio is just growing so fast. But how has that impacted your life outside of the business itself?
Oh, greatly. There was, that's a loaded question. No, there's just, there was a period of a lot of stress just surrounding leaving the studio. But now I just feel so much more, I don't know, like I have so much more purpose and I'm in charge of
Mm,
when I take off. and I have the weekends free. I was working just to make ends meet. I was working still a restaurant job on Sundays, just left over from when I was performing, you know. I switched over to teaching, but I was like, I kind of have to keep this. So I was working like 13-hour shifts on Sundays. So
Oh my
I
gosh.
just
I didn't
had
know it was
no,
that long every Sunday. Holy cow.
but I was
Wow.
able, like, as soon as I left my studio, I was like, let me keep the restaurant because otherwise I'm absolutely going to go insane with stress. But
Yes.
it was growing so quickly that I was like, oh my gosh, I can leave the studio too. Or sorry, the restaurant as well. And I left the restaurant a week after I quit the studio job. So I now have my weekends free, which all my friends are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And they were always like, you never have time for me. And I'm like, I know. And I want to have time for you, believe me.
Yeah.
But I was just constantly working.
Mm.
Um, so it's just really nice to be able to create my own schedule. And there's been a bit of a learning curve of like, oh my gosh, like I don't have to ask someone off. Like my friend had
Yep.
their Carnegie Hall debut, and it was on a
Oh.
Monday, and I was like, oh, but I'm teaching, and it's the day before Halloween, so then I'd be taking 2 days off. So then now I feel guilty about that, and I was like, no, this is a big deal. And like,
Yeah.
it's fine. It fits in the days that I've taken off. So you know, that was a bit of a learning curve that like, oh, let me
Yeah.
ask off. Wait, no, that's me.
I am my boss.
I
I
am
am in
my
charge of
boss
this.
now.
And you have like
Yeah,
8 weeks off or 8 Mondays, 8 Tuesdays, 8 Wednesdays, so on and so forth built
yeah,
into your calendar. So you can just take those. You have full freedom over that. It's kind of a wild feeling. Yeah.
yeah. And I got sick once, and it was just
Mm.
so lovely to be like, oh, this was in my studio policy. Like, this is included in those 8 weeks off. Like, it was so lovely not to have to reschedule like 7 lessons. You know,
Yeah.
it's just almost impossible at some point when you have a full schedule already. So that was very freeing as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So a better work-life balance all around, which
Yes.
is a great place to be. That's awesome. Okay, I know we've talked about this a little bit, and you've obviously talked a lot about what you've got out of the program, which is amazing. But if someone's looking at this right now, maybe I'll kind of ask two questions in one. Why do you think they should move forward on this maybe sooner rather than later? Or like what kind of advice would you give there? And then the second part of that question would be who is a good fit for Outside the Box and who would benefit from this the most?
Ooh. So I'll start with why someone should do this. I honestly, if you're looking to grow your studio, I don't see why you shouldn't. I
Well,
feel
thank
like,
you.
yeah, I feel like everything was so well thought through and so meticulous and so supported. I remember entering the program and I was like, I am never going to have the time to do all of this. Like it felt very
Mm,
daunting, but everything was it was laid out in little tiny chunks and little tiny snippets. I found myself almost like addictively like continuing on further. You know, like you were like set aside an hour, hour and a half in the morning. So I was doing that. But then when I saw like the results it was getting, I probably went a little too far in the other direction, but it was like sort of addicting. Like, oh my gosh, like if I do XYZ, XYZ happens. um, so yeah, I never thought I would be that person. I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I can find like the time. But
mm,
everything was so laid out in, like I was saying, in little tiny chunks that it was so easy to just continue on and know exactly what the next step was. Um, so I think everyone should do it. I can't, I honestly
thank
can't see a
you.
reason why you wouldn't. Like, I think as long as you follow what you have laid out, like, and it's just so lovely too that it's repeatable. Like,
Mm.
if I right now I'm full, but say in the summer, I know exactly how I can go back and like try and look for new students. You know, it's not just a one-time thing. I think that's really important.
Do you feel like you have complete control over your business?
Oh, I do feel very in control. I think part of me still it happens so fast that I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, like
Yeah.
it's almost it's crazy how fast it happened. I never thought it would happen this fast, but I do feel in complete control.
Hmm.
Yes.
That's amazing. I'm so proud of you, Rebecca, and I'm just so excited for all the growth and the success that you've had and are continuing to have. I mean, we had a conversation last week about what comes next, all the possibilities that we have, and there's no rush in any of that. I think we need to
Yeah.
enjoy the current success before we take on any more projects for sure. But
Yeah.
it's wonderful to see you in this place and hearing you talk about this today compared to when we did meet in May. You are more at peace. I mean, you just present as more
Yeah.
like relaxed and rested and confident and all the passion
Yeah.
that you've always had for your students. It just feels like that shines through even more because you've got more space for that in your
Yeah.
daily life. And it makes me so
And then
happy to see that for you.
I'm like getting emotional thinking about it. But like I I just like go I'm driving around and I'm like, "Oh my god, I have like the best job in the world." And I think
Oh,
sometimes people are like, "Really?" I'm like, "No, like absolutely. This is like everything that I've wanted and more." So, oh,
oh my
yeah,
gosh.
it's good.
You're gonna make me cry. I love this part of what we get to do at Outside the Box because when I was teaching full time myself, and I still teach, but I can't do as much. But when I was teaching full time, I could only impact my like 42 to 46 students. Like that was what I had the capacity for. And now I get to see people like you who care so much and you're so good at what you do. And like you have so much passion and enthusiasm for this. Like seeing all the students that you're helping and supporting just makes it fulfills me so much. It just makes my heart so happy to see students, as you talked about, like parents coming in and saying like I didn't have a great musical experience, but other kids are just
Yeah,
thriving and they get to work with you and the whole family's impacted positively like that. I love music. Like I love this industry. I love what we do. It's so cool. And I'm
I
so stinking
know.
happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You deserve it all and a lot more. There's a lot of good things coming your way still too. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I
It's
couldn't have done
awesome.
it without you. So thank you.
Oh, that means the world. Thank you very much for saying that. Oh, okay. Well, we'll end on a teary note. Thank you so much
I knew this
for
would
sharing
happen.
everything. Oh my gosh. It's been a journey and it's been so, I am so thankful that I got to witness this growth for you because it's just been amazing. I don't even have the words for how just remarkable it's been to see you take off this fast and the work that you've done and the excitement that you've done it with is just it's so exciting. I'm so proud of you. Congratulations again. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing all of this.
Of
And as a
course.
parting thought, if someone is watching this and they're like, man, Rebecca's so cool, how can they find you on the internet in case they just want to learn a little bit more about you in your studio?
So I'm still growing and I need to open up my Instagram account, but you can find me. You
That's our
can
next
find me at,
project.
yes, exactly. Always growing, always growing. You can find me at RebeccaRuddleVoiceStudio.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening to. I hope you got something out of this. And I mean, I certainly did today. So I appreciate your time. Thanks again.